Rain does something to memory. It pulls it up from the soil, like roots refusing burial, like something that was never meant to stay buried in the first place. I am standing at the window of the apartment that used to smell like two people, and now only smells like one, watching the street below drown in October water, and I am thinking about the morning Marco left. Not the morning I found him gone. The morning before that. The last morning that still counted as ours. He had burned the toast. Again. It was a running joke between us. His complete and catastrophic inability to operate a toaster without producing something that belonged more to archaeology than breakfast. I had laughed at him from the doorway of the kitchen, still half-dressed, tie hanging loose around my neck, and he had turned around with that expression he always wore when he was caught doing something endearingly stupid. Eyebrows raised, lower lip caught between his teeth, dark eyes lit with the particular warmth that I had come to think of as mine, only mine. "It's not that bad," he had said. "Marco, it's carbon. Carbon is a building block of life. Not when it's on top of a bagel." He had laughed then. That real laugh. The one that started in his chest and shook his whole body. The one I had spent the first 3 months of our relationship trying to earn before I realized it came easily to him, that he laughed like that because the world genuinely delighted him. He laughed and I crossed the kitchen and stole the ruined bagel from his hand and kissed the corner of his mouth, and he leaned into me the way he always did. Like I was something solid in a world that kept shifting beneath his feet. I did not know then that I was about to become the thing that made the world shift. I found out 3 days later when I came home to a note on the kitchen table and a closet that had been emptied with careful, deliberate precision, not ransacked, not dramatic. Folded into absence, like he had thought long and hard about how to disappear without leaving wreckage. The note said, "I'm sorry, I love you, don't look for me, please." 4 sentences, no explanation, no forwarding address, no reason. I looked for him anyway. My name is Joey Conley. I am 31 years old. I am an alpha, which means nothing more and nothing less than a particular arrangement of biology that the world has decided to make into a personality type, a social category, a destiny. I present dominant. My instincts run toward protection, toward claiming, toward the particular possessive gravity that our kind carries in the blood. Marco Lozano was my omega. Is. The tense is something I have wrestled with for a year. We met at a work conference 3 years ago. I was in urban development, he was in environmental consulting. And we had been seated next to each other at a panel about sustainable city planning that we were both secretly too tired to pay attention to. He had doodled in the margin of his notepad, little architectural sketches, precise and intricate, buildings that looked like they had grown from the earth rather than been constructed on it. I had watched him draw for 20 minutes before he noticed, and when he looked up, he had not been embarrassed. He had just tilted the notepad toward me, offering the view. "Force of habit," he had said. "They're beautiful," I had said, and meant it about more than the drawings. We had coffee that afternoon, dinner that night. We exchanged numbers with the specific charged carefulness of 2 people who understood that something significant was happening, but weren't ready to name it yet. He lived 2 hours away from me at the time. We made it work. We made it work for 8 months before he moved into my apartment, into my space, into the breathing room of my daily life. And it was so easy that I kept waiting for the moment it would stop being easy. The moment came. I just hadn't expected it to arrive like a ghost, quietly, in the night, leaving nothing but a note and the ghost shape of him in the cold side of our bed. The first week, I convinced myself there was a rational explanation, a family emergency, a mental health crisis that required space. Something temporary, something that had a resolution at the end of it, something that would make sense when the full picture emerged. I called his phone. Disconnected. I drove to his mother's house. She opened the door with the expression of a woman who had been dreading this exact moment, and she told me, with the flat, careful delivery of someone who had rehearsed it, that she did not know where Marco was, that he had called her, that he was safe, that she had been asked to tell me nothing more. I am not proud of how I responded to that. I kept my voice level because I was raised to keep my voice level, but I could feel the alpha instinct in me rising like a tide, the need to suffix all fix, to reach through whatever distance had opened up and close it by force of will alone. I managed not to let it show. I thanked her. I left. I hired a private investigator 2 weeks later. She was thorough. She spent 6 weeks and found nothing concrete. Evidence that Marco had withdrawn his savings in cash before he left, that he had taken a bus to a city 4 hours away, and then effectively dissolved into the infrastructure of a life that had been carefully constructed to be invisible. No new bank accounts under his name, no new lease, no digital footprint. He had planned this. That was the thing that hurt in a way I couldn't quite reach with ordinary grief. He had stood in our kitchen and burned toast and laughed at my expression and leaned into my kiss, and underneath all of that, he had been planning how to disappear. He had been carrying this decision in his body while I was touching him, while I thought I knew every inch of what he was thinking. The investigator told me, gently but directly, that when an omega goes to these lengths to leave an alpha, it is usually for reasons that deserve respect. I knew that, intellectually, in the part of me that had been raised to understand consent and autonomy and the long, violent history of what omegas had endured at the hands of alphas who thought love was the same thing as ownership. I knew that. I believed it. I had always believed it. But there is a difference between knowing something in your mind and feeling it stop hurting in your chest. I told the investigator to close the case. Then I went home and sat on the kitchen floor for 3 hours because the chair felt too far from the ground. The months accumulated the way months do when you are surviving rather than living. One after another, indifferent to your suffering, reliable in their passage even when nothing else is. I threw myself into work with the dedication of a man who has decided that exhaustion is a reasonable substitute for peace, my colleagues noticed. My best friend, Dana Reeves, took me to dinner every 2 weeks and watched me with the specific, careful attention of someone who is monitoring for cracks in a structure, trying to identify the point of failure before the collapse. "You could date," she said, "at month 4, gently. I don't want to date." "Joey, I know," I said. "I know what you're going to say. I've heard it. I understand the logic of it. I just don't want to." She did not push. That was one of the things I loved about Dana. She could identify the exact line between support and pressure, and she never crossed it. She just refilled my wine glass and changed the subject, and I loved her for it in the quiet, desperate way of someone who is grateful for every small mercy. What she didn't know, what I didn't tell anyone, was that I still talked to Marco at night, not out loud usually, just in my head, the running monologue of a man in a relationship that had lost its other participant. I told him about my day. I told him when I saw something that would have made him laugh. I told him that I had finally replaced the toaster and that the new one had 4 settings and a bagel function specifically, and that I thought he would find that funny if he were here. He wasn't here. The empty space where he had been kept expanding rather than contracting, the way some absences do, growing larger the longer they go unfilled, reshaping the entire architecture of a life around the outline of what's missing. It was at month 11 that everything changed, not with fanfare, not with the dramatic orchestration that the magnitude of the moment deserved. It happened the way most life-altering things happen, quietly, sideways, in a moment that looked ordinary from the outside. I was at a mutual friend's birthday gathering, low-key. A dozen people in an apartment not much bigger than mine, the particular comfortable noise of a social gathering among people who have known each other long enough to stop performing. I was standing near the windows. I always gravitate toward windows at parties. It's a habit I've had since childhood, nursing a drink and half following a conversation about a movie I hadn't seen. Across the room, someone was showing photos on their phone. The birthday boy, Eli, was leaning over someone's shoulder and laughing at something on the screen, and there was nothing about this that should have snagged my attention, but something did. Some frequency in the air, some particular resonance that I would not have been able to explain scientifically, but that I felt in the base of my spine like a tuning fork being struck. I drifted closer. Casually. The way you do when you are not yet conscious of what you are doing or why. The woman holding the phone. I had met her once before, a friend of Eli's, someone who worked in landscape architecture, was scrolling through photos and explaining something about a project she had worked on. And then she paused, and her face did the thing faces do when a photo appears that was not meant for this audience, and she started to swipe past it. But I had already seen it. Not much, a fraction of a second. A baby, very small, clearly newborn or close to it, wrapped in a green blanket, held in the arms of someone whose face was half turned away from the camera. But the hands holding the baby, I knew those hands, long fingers, a small scar on the right thumb from a kitchen accident 2 years ago, something to do with Amanda line slicer and Marco's characteristic overconfidence about his cooking abilities. A particular way of cradling things, careful, instinctive, like he was built for the act of holding. Can I? My voice came out strange. I stopped, started again. Can I see that photo? She looked up at me with the wariness of someone who understood immediately that this was not a casual question. Which one? The baby, I said, with the green blanket. A pause stretched between us. She looked at Eli. Eli looked at me with an expression I could not entirely read, something between guilt and the particular stillness of a person caught between competing loyalties. Joey? Eli said carefully. Is that Marco? The silence that followed was its own answer. I did not make a scene. I want to be clear about that, because it would have been easy to let the alpha instinct roar up and fill the room with the particular territorial energy of a man who has just discovered that the person he loves has been somewhere all along, has been whole and present in the world, has had a baby. A baby. The thought kept arriving and departing like a wave I couldn't catch. Marco had a baby. Marco had been pregnant when he left, or had become pregnant after, or the timeline was a thing I could not assemble from a single blurred photograph and the absence of a year. I excused myself from the gathering. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 45 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, not going anywhere. The first thing I felt was not anger, which surprised me. It arrived later, in smaller doses, mixed with so many other things that it was never pure. What I felt first was something more like awe, the staggering particular awe of a reality that has restructured itself while you weren't looking, that has added a dimension you had not imagined. Marco had a child. Marco had our child, maybe, probably. The mathematics of it, the timeline of when he had left versus how small the baby had appeared in the photograph, suggested. I stopped that line of thinking before I could complete it, because I was in a parking garage and I was shaking, and this was not the place for the full weight of this realization to land on me. I drove home. I sat on the kitchen floor again, which seemed to be where I processed the largest things, and I thought carefully and at length about what I was going to do. The easy answer, the instinctive answer, was to find him. To use every resource available to me, to go back to the investigator, to mobilize the full force of the need that had been building in me for 11 months, and to find him and find the child and bring them home. But I sat with that answer long enough to hear what was underneath it, and what was underneath it was this: Marco had left because he wanted to. Marco had built himself an invisible life because he had decided that the visible one, the one with me in it, was not one he could stay in. And whatever his reasons, he had made that choice in full knowledge of what it would cost, what it would do to me, what it would mean to carry a secret this large. He had reasons. They might be reasons I disagreed with. They might be reasons born of fear or pain or some misunderstanding so deep I couldn't see the bottom of it. But they were his reasons, and the question I needed to sit with was not how to override them, but whether they could be survived, whether we could survive them, both of us, together or separately, depending on what he wanted. What did Marco want? That was the question I had been unable to answer for a year because he had been so careful to leave me no way to ask it. And now that there might be a child, now that the equation had a third variable I hadn't known to account for, the urgency of the question had changed its shape entirely. Eli called me the next morning. I had expected this. Eli was one of the kindest people I had ever met, and also one of the most conflict-averse, which meant that the fact that he had stayed silent last night while I was clearly spiraling had been costing him sleep. "I need to explain some things," he said without preamble. "You don't owe me an explanation." "No, but I think Marco does, and since he isn't in a position to give you one right now, I'm going to." A pause. "Can we meet?" We met at a coffee shop near my office, the one with the uncomfortable chairs that discouraged lingering, which suited both of us. This was not a conversation that wanted to be comfortable. Eli had known Marco since childhood. That was something I had known. What I had not known was the extent to which Eli had been Marco's lifeline during the year that had passed, had known where he was, had visited him twice, had been the only thread connecting Marco's hidden life to the world that knew us both. He told me, slowly and with evident care, the shape of what had happened. Marco had been afraid. Not of me. Eli was clear about that, careful and deliberate in his clarity, as though he had rehearsed this distinction specifically because he knew how it might land. Not afraid of me as a person, not afraid that I would hurt him, afraid of something older and larger and harder to name, the particular fear that some Omegas carry about what pregnancy means in the context of an alpha bond, about what happens to the selfhood you have built when biology and instinct and social expectation all converge at once and try to pull you in a direction you have not consented to travel. Marco had not told me because he had not known how to tell me without losing himself in the telling. That was how Eli described it, and I turned the phrase over in my mind like something I could not yet fully understand but needed to keep. He had not known how to tell me without losing himself in the telling. I thought about Marco in our kitchen, burning toast, laughing. I thought about the way he had always leaned into me, like I was something solid, and I wondered for the first time whether that feeling of solidity had been, for him, partly a trap, whether my steadiness had been something he loved, and also something that had made his own edges harder to find. I was an alpha. That meant something to the world even when it meant nothing to me personally. It meant that the world had certain ideas about what happened next, when an omega and an alpha bonded, when a child entered the picture. Ideas about hierarchy and instinct and the natural order of things. Marco knew I didn't subscribe to those ideas. I had told him so 100 times, in words and in choices, and in the careful way I had always tried to make space for who he was outside of who we were together. But knowing someone says a thing and feeling it to be true in the marrow of your fear are different things, and Marco had been afraid. "Where is he?" I asked when Eli had finished. "Joey? I'm not asking so I can show up uninvited. I need you to know that. I'm asking because I need to know if he's all right. If they're both all right." Eli looked at me for a long moment, the specific, evaluating look of someone deciding whether to trust. Then, "He's all right. The baby is all right. He's managing. It's hard, being alone with a newborn. He won't admit that. You know how he is." I did know how he was. Marco had the particular stubbornness of someone who had been self-reliant for so long that asking for help felt like failure, like a structural admission that he could not be trusted to hold himself together. It was one of the things about him that I had loved and also worried about, that independence that sometimes tipped into isolation. "Will you tell him I know?" I said. "Not that I want anything, not with any conditions. Just tell him I know and that I'm not angry and that I would like to talk when he's ready. And that if he's never ready, I'll find a way to be all right with that." The last part was a lie, maybe. I didn't know if I would be all right with that, but I knew that it needed to be true, that I needed to make it true, because Marco's right to choose his own life was not conditional on my ability to tolerate his choices. Eli nodded slowly. "I'll tell him." 2 weeks passed. I did not think they would be the hardest 2 weeks of the year, but they were. Harder than the first weeks after the note, harder than the months of silence, because now I knew. Now I had a shape for what was missing, a face for the absence, a reason that was not a rejection of me, but a fear about something larger than either of us. I functioned. I went to work. I ate adequately. I slept approximately. I did not call Eli, though I wanted to. I did not do any of the searching I had spent months doing, because this time Marco knew I was here, and reaching toward him now would be pressure when what was needed was space. Dana noticed the change in me, not improvement exactly, but a different quality of tension. Like I had shifted from grieving to waiting. Something happened, she said. Yes. Do you want to talk about it? Not yet. A pause. Soon, maybe. She accepted this with the grace she always brought to the things I couldn't fully articulate yet. And I was grateful for her in the particular desperate way of someone who has learned to value the people who don't require explanation. On the 15th day, my phone rang. Unknown number. I knew before I answered. Joey. His voice. A year and 15 days later, Marco's voice through a phone speaker, and the entire architecture of the last year rearranged itself around that single syllable of my name. Like everything had been waiting for this specific calibration to come back into alignment. I sat down. The kitchen floor again. There must be something about that particular patch of linoleum that makes the biggest moments feel survivable. Marco, I said. A long silence. Not empty. Full of all the things we were both calculating, the weight and order of what needed to be said, who should go first. Eli told me, he said finally, that you know. Yes. Are you? He stopped. Tried again. How angry are you? I'm not angry. Joey. I was. At different points, yes, I was angry, but that's not where I am right now. Right now, I just want to know that you're okay. Another silence. Longer this time. And through it I could hear the background of his life, a small sound, something soft and rhythmic, the specific quality of quiet that exists in a space where there is a sleeping infant. We're okay, he said quietly. She's okay. She, a daughter. A daughter. Something happened in my chest that I did not have language for, immediately. Some enormous, staggering thing that was joy and terror and love and grief, all compressed into a single instant. Pressing outward from the inside, like a sound trying to become audible through glass. She, I repeated. Yeah. His voice had changed. Softer now, with the particular texture that comes into people's voices when they are talking about the thing they love most in the world. I named her. I named her Luz. It means light. Luz, light. I pressed the back of my hand to my mouth for a moment, getting myself back. That's perfect, I managed. That's a perfect name. We talked for 2 hours that first night. Not about the big things, not about the year, not about what had happened and why, not about the future and what it might hold. We talked about Luz, about what she looked like, about the way she made a specific face when she was trying to decide whether to cry, about the exact pitch and character of her various complaints. Marco talked about his daughter with the full, unguarded wonder of new parenthood. And I listened. And something that had been clenched in me for a year began, very slowly, to loosen. Before he hung up, he said, "She looks like you." Just that. Then silence, and the soft click of disconnection, and me sitting on the kitchen floor, holding the phone against my chest like it was something I needed to keep warm. We talked every night after that. Not long conversations, always. Marco was running on the fractured sleep of a parent with a newborn, and exhaustion lived in his voice the way weather lives in a landscape, constant and shaping. But every night when Luz went down, he called. Sometimes for 20 minutes, once for almost 4 hours when she slept unexpectedly long and he didn't know what to do with the silence. The conversations expanded gradually, the way trust expands. Carefully, in small increments, each one testing the ground before committing weight to it. We talked about small things first, the texture of daily life, the specific comedy and terror of him navigating new parenthood alone. I told him about work. He told me about the town he was living in, small and near enough to the water that he could hear it from his window on quiet nights. Then, one night, about 3 weeks into this new arrangement, he said, "I should explain. You don't have to. I want to. I want." A pause. I need to. Not for you. I mean, for you too, but for me. I'd been carrying it for a long time. So I listened. He told me about the day he had found out he was pregnant. Alone in the bathroom at the clinic, looking at a result that he had suspected, but that still landed with the force of something falling from a great height. He had sat with it for 3 days before he told anyone. Not me, not his mother, no one, just sat with it in the middle of our shared life. Sleeping next to me and eating breakfast with me and laughing at the toaster with me, carrying this enormous new fact inside himself. He had not been afraid of the pregnancy. He wanted me to understand that. He was afraid of what came after. Of the bond instinct, the pull toward the alpha that biology encoded in omegas when they were carrying an alpha's child. The way it rewrote priorities, restructured autonomy, could turn love into something that looked like devotion from the outside but felt like dissolution from the inside. He had watched it happen to people he loved. He had spent his adult life consciously building the parts of himself that were purely his own, that didn't belong to anyone, that couldn't be taken or reshaped. And he had been afraid that what he felt for me, which was real, which was the realest thing he had felt for anyone, was going to be swallowed by what his biology felt for me. That he would wake up one day and not be able to tell the difference between loving me and being shaped by the gravity of what I was. I know that's not rational, he said. I know you specifically would never. It doesn't have to be about me specifically, I said. It's about the whole structure of it, what you'd been taught about what happens, what you'd seen. Yes. Quiet. That. Exactly that. I thought about what I wanted to say carefully because there was a version of this conversation that was defensive, that reached for my own hurt, my own year of searching and silence and loss, and that was not the conversation that was needed. What was needed was to hear him, fully, without turning it back toward myself. I wish you had told me, I said eventually. Not because I think you were wrong to be afraid, but because I would have wanted to help you carry it. Whatever that looked like. Even if it meant giving you space that felt like distance, I would have figured out how to do that. I know, he said. I think I knew that even when I left. I think that's why it hurt so much to go. A long pause. I couldn't trust that I would let you help. I was too afraid of needing you too much. Luz was 7 weeks old when Marco agreed to a video call. I had not pushed for this. It had been his idea, offered tentatively one evening with the specific careful quality of something being tested for structural soundness. I had said yes immediately, then sat for 10 minutes afterward getting my face under control because I had an hour and I did not want to spend it reassembling myself. He looked tired. That was the first thing. Tired in the deep, structural way of new parenthood. Tired at the cellular level, with shadows under his dark eyes that I had never seen there before. He also looked, I didn't have the word for it immediately, had to reach for it, inhabited. More completely himself than I had ever seen him, as though the year of being alone with himself had done something to the surface of him, worn away the social coating, and left what was genuinely underneath. And he was holding Luz. She was asleep against his chest, her tiny face pointed at the camera with the serene, absolute trust of a baby who has decided the world is safe and warm and smells like home. She had Marco's coloring, deep brown skin, dark lashes that lay against her cheeks like ink strokes, and something about the shape of her face, some particular geometry of it, that reached through the screen and grabbed me by the sternum. I must have made some sound, a small one. Yeah, Marco said, watching my face. I know, she's... I stopped, started again. Marco. I know, he said again, softer. We sat there for a moment, just looking at each other with her between us, in the only way she could be between us, which was through a screen, which was not enough, but was something. Was more than nothing. Was a beginning. I should have called sooner, he said. I'm sorry, I needed to know I could do it. Without... He gestured vaguely, a full-arm gesture that I had always interpreted as without filling in all the words, before I brought anyone else back in. I understand that, I said, and I did. I was understanding more and more of it, the longer I sat with it, finding the shape of his fear in the shape of my own ignorance, the places where I had never thought to ask, because it had never occurred to me that the thing I was offering could feel like a weight rather than a shelter. Can I ask you something? He said. Anything. Did you hate me? At any point. Over the year. I considered this honestly, the way he deserved to have it considered. No, I said, I was angry sometimes. I was hurt. There were moments where the anger was very close to the surface, and I had to work to keep it from becoming something else. But hate, no, I couldn't get there. I tried once or twice because it would have been easier. Hate is cleaner than missing someone. Something shifted in his face. His jaw moved. That specific micro-expression he always made when something hit him harder than he had expected. "I missed you," he said quietly. "Every day. I want you to know that. I didn't leave because I stopped. It was the opposite. I left because I didn't trust what I would become if I stayed." "And now?" I asked, very gently, not pushing, opening a door and standing back from it, letting him decide whether to walk through. He looked down at Luz for a long moment, at the small weight of her against his chest, at the absolute trust she placed in his arms. "Now I'm starting to think," he said slowly, "that maybe I was wrong about what staying would have cost me, that maybe I didn't have to lose myself to keep you." He looked up. "I'm not there yet. I need you to know that. I'm not ready to. I don't know what I'm ready for. But I wanted to talk to you. I wanted you to see her. I wanted—" He stopped. "I know," I said. This time it was my turn to say it. "I know." The conversations continued. The video calls became a daily event. Not always long, not always emotionally loaded. Sometimes just parallel existence through a screen, while Luz occupied his attention and I ate dinner on my kitchen floor because I had started sitting there by habit now. It felt like a different floor than the one I had sat on grieving. It had become, somehow, a floor for the big things, and this was the biggest thing I had experienced in years. I learned Luz through those calls. Learned the sound of her when she was hungry versus when she was tired. Learned the specific squint she made when there was too much light. Learned that she liked motion, that Marco had developed the habit of pacing while he held her because it was the only thing that consistently worked, wearing a path in the small floor of whatever apartment he was living in. He told me, eventually, what city. Not the address, not yet, but the city. A coastal place, 4 hours from me, small and quiet and full of the kind of light that comes off water in certain seasons, the kind he had always drawn in the margins of his notepads. I did not suggest visiting. That was his territory to offer, not mine to claim. One night, about a month into the calls, he said, "Tell me something you're afraid of." An unexpected question, offered into the comfortable silence we had been sitting in. I thought about it. "I'm afraid," I said carefully, "that I will do everything right and it still won't be enough. That the thing you were afraid of, the thing you left to protect yourself from, is something I can't actually solve because it's structural, built into what I am. And that no matter how much I want to be what you need, what I am might always feel like a threat to what you're trying to hold on to." A silence, long and full. "That's a very mature fear," he said. "I've had a year to develop it." A soft breath from him that might have been a laugh. "I'm afraid," he said, and I could hear the effort in it, the deliberate exposure of something he would rather have kept protected. "That I will figure out how to trust you and then find out that it was easier to trust you from a distance. That the version of you I've been building in my head for a year is better than the actual one, and that when you're here again, I'll—" He stopped. "Discover?" "I burn toast?" I offered. That breath again, definitely a laugh this time. "You don't burn toast. I know, that was your thing. I was trying to make a parallel." "The parallel doesn't work. I know, I was reaching." He laughed. The real one, the chest shake laugh, and I heard it through the phone and something in me came home that had been lost for a year. He asked me to visit on a Sunday afternoon, 6 weeks after the first call. The message was very simple. If you wanted to drive up this weekend, that would be okay. No elaboration, no conditions attached, no disclaimer. I read it 4 times to make sure I was understanding it correctly. Then I typed back, "I'll be there Saturday afternoon if that works." He replied with a single thumbs-up emoji, which was so Marco in its understatement that I almost called him immediately just to tell him that. I did not sleep particularly well in the days leading up to it. The drive was 4 hours, and I spent it in the specific state of elevated attention that comes before the things that matter. Every sensation a little sharper than usual. The light on the road, and the sound of the radio, and the way the landscape gradually shifted as I got closer to the water, becoming flatter and wider and filled with the particular quality of coastal air that has always smelled to me like possibility. He was living in a small apartment on a street lined with old trees that had overgrown their sidewalk squares, ground floor, window boxes with something green growing in them. He had always had plants, had a particular talent for keeping things alive. I sat in the car for a moment after I parked, getting myself level. Then I knocked. The door opened and he was there. A year and some weeks. He looked the same and completely different, the way people do when you have been carrying a version of them in your memory and then have to update it against the actual person standing in front of you. The tiredness was still there, but softer now, settling into his face like something he was learning to carry. He was wearing an old shirt I recognized from our life together, faded green, and he was not holding Luz, but I could hear her from somewhere in the apartment. The small, satisfied sounds of a baby who was awake but content. We looked at each other. "Hi," Marco said. "Hi," I said. Then neither of us said anything for a moment. And in that moment, the whole year lived between us. The note and the silence and the searching and the photograph at the party and the phone call and the video calls and the careful, slow reconstruction of trust. All of it compressed into the 2 feet of doorway between us. He stepped back to let me in. Luz was on a blanket on the living room floor, surrounded by the soft chaos of infant paraphernalia, doing what very small humans do when placed on their backs, studying the ceiling with the profound seriousness of a philosopher encountering the universe for the first time. She was bigger than I had imagined from the video calls, rounder and more solid, with the particular heft of a baby who has spent weeks doing the work of growing. She had Marco's dark eyes and something about her brow that made her look perpetually thoughtful. And the shape of her hands, those long fingers, that precise, careful grip. I crouched down near the blanket, not reaching, not touching, not yet, not without knowing what she wanted or was ready for, just looking. She looked back at me. Then she made a sound, something between a gurgle and an expression. A sound that had absolutely no emotional valence to it, but that Marco, behind me, apparently could read because he made a soft, fawn noise in return. "That means she's decided you're acceptable," he said. "She's very selective." "High standards," I said. "She gets it from me." I looked up at him. He was leaning against the doorframe of the kitchen, arms crossed, watching me with the specific, careful expression of a person trying to read a situation they can no longer entirely control. Not wary, exactly, more like braced. "Can I hold her?" I asked. "A beat?" Then, "Yeah. Here, let me." He came and scooped her up with the practiced efficiency of a person who has learned their baby's preferences in exhaustive detail, the specific angle and grip that produced the least complaint. Then he held her toward me. I took her, adjusted to her weight, which was less than I expected, and also somehow more. The weight of a person, even a very small one, has a significance that doesn't correlate to pounds. She looked up at me from the crook of my arm with those dark eyes, and I looked down at her. And something enormous happened that I was not prepared for, and that I would not have been able to describe to anyone afterward in words that were adequate to it. She was real. She was here. She was mine in the way that she was Marco's. Not ownership, not possession, but connection. The particular bond of blood and bone, and the knowledge that this person, this whole new person who was only a few months old and who had opinions about ceiling fixtures, would always be someone I was responsible to. "Luz," I said very quietly. "Hi." She made the gurgle sound again. I looked up and found Marco watching us with an expression that cracked something open in my chest. He was crying. Very quietly, the tears running without drama, the way some crying does, not performed, not seeking audience, just happening. "Marco, don't," he said, not harshly. "Just give me a second." I gave him a second. I gave him several seconds holding his daughter and watching him put himself back together. And I thought about what Eli had told me. He didn't know how to tell you without losing himself in the telling. And I thought I was beginning to understand that the fear of dissolution, The fear of needing someone so much that you couldn't remember where they ended and you began. I also thought that maybe the thing he was most afraid of was the thing he was demonstrating right now, that he could cry in front of me, that he could be undone by something, that the walls that kept him intact could come down in the presence of the right witness, and that the world had not ended, that he was still entirely himself. "It's okay," I said, meaning everything. All of it. Everything that had happened and everything that might happen, and the space between us that was still large, but not anymore uncrossable. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, looked at me, looked at Luz in my arms. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I don't have a plan. I don't know what this looks like going forward. I knew I couldn't keep not doing this. I couldn't keep you on the outside of her." "You don't have to know what it looks like," I said. "We can figure it out. Together?" The word landed between us with all its weight. "If that's what you want," I said, "on whatever terms, however slowly, whatever shape it needs to take, I'm not going anywhere." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and sat down next to me on the floor. Not touching, not yet just near, and we sat together with Luz between us. And outside the window, the light came off the water and through the glass and lay across the three of us, like something that had been waiting patiently to happen. We did not fix everything that afternoon, or that weekend, or in the weeks that followed. That is not how repair works. Repair is not a sudden event, but a practice. The daily choice to return to the work of understanding each other, to hold space for the parts that are still tender, to resist the urge to paper over the unresolved with the warmth of proximity. I drove up to see him every weekend for the next 2 months. Sometimes I stayed for one night, sometimes two. We learned each other again from a slight remove, the careful relearning of people who have been changed by an interval. He had changed. I had changed. The question was whether the changed versions of us fit together the way the original ones had, or better. He cooked for me the second weekend. Nothing elaborate. He had gotten better at not burning things, which he credited to Luz's presence on the grounds that he could not afford to fill a small apartment with smoke. I sat at his kitchen table and watched him move around his space, his movements efficient and practiced and entirely his own. And I thought about the version of him that had leaned into me in our old kitchen and let me be the solid thing, and about the version of him that was standing here now, still warm, still beautiful, still the person I had spent a year mapping in absence, but with a new kind of centeredness that had not been there before. He had found himself in the doing of the hardest, loneliest thing. I didn't know how to tell him that without it sounding like I was endorsing what had happened, like I was saying the year of loss had been worth it. It hadn't been worth it. It had been terrible. But something had come out of it that was real, that I could see in him, and I wanted him to know I could see it. I tried, one night, while he was putting Luz down and I was washing the dinner dishes. Domestic, quiet, the specific intimacy of shared labor in a small space. "You seem different," I said. He looked up from the process of settling her into her bassinet. "Different how? More you, more completely you. It's hard to explain." A pause. He looked at Luz for a moment, then back at me. "I had to figure out who I was when I wasn't with you," he said. "Or partly because of you, because of what I was afraid of becoming. I had to find out if I existed outside of it." And I do," he said, and there was something in his voice that was both relief and a kind of pride. "I really do." "I know," I said. "I can see it." He looked at me with an expression I had never quite seen on him before, not the warmth I knew, not the particular way he looked at me when he was happy, but something more complicated, more grateful, more adult. "I'm sorry," he said, "for the year, for the way I did it. I know it wasn't fair." "No," I agreed, "it wasn't. I needed to say that at some point, and I want to say it without it being an accusation. It wasn't fair. I know. And I also know that you were trying to survive something, and that what was fair and what was necessary were two different things for you in that moment." "Yes." He sat down on the edge of his couch, the bassinet nearby. Both things are true. Both things are true, I agreed. We sat with that for a while. The way you have to sit with things that are complicated, that resist resolution, that have to be held with both hands, rather than filed away. The first time we touched again, really touched, was the fourth weekend. It was not romantic. He was tired. The particular bone-deep tiredness of a week that had included a teething episode and a night of virtually no sleep, and we were sitting on the couch and at some point he leaned sideways and put his head on my shoulder. Not planned. Just gravity and exhaustion, and maybe also something that had been waiting. I did not move, did not reach for him. Just stayed very still and let him be there, and after a moment I felt him exhale, long and slow, the kind of exhale that is also a letting go. We stayed like that for a long time. Lou's asleep in the next room. The water sound from the window. The particular silence of two people who do not need to fill it anymore because they have enough history that silence has already been furnished. Eventually he said, very quietly, I forgot how this felt. Like what? Like something is enough. I had to close my eyes for a moment, take a breath, come back. Me too, I said. He brought up the bond, the biological component of what we were to each other, the alpha-omega bond that he had been afraid of, on a Sunday morning in the 6th week, while we were both sitting on the kitchen floor feeding Luz a bottle. She had opinions about how the bottle was being held and was expressing them with characteristic directness. I need to talk about it eventually, he said. The bond thing, the instinct thing, what I was afraid of. Okay, I said, not today. I'm not ready today. I just wanted to say that I know it's there. I know we haven't talked about it properly. And I don't want it to be the thing we're not talking about. It doesn't have to be the thing we're not talking about. I know. He adjusted the bottle angle to Luz's specifications and she settled. I've been thinking about it differently since we started doing this. Whatever this is, the calls and the visits, and this. He made the same full-arm gesture that always meant everything in the room and also some things that are too big for specific words. And I think the fear was partly that I would stop being able to tell the difference between what I wanted and what the bond wanted. But I've been watching myself. And when I wanted to call you that first night, when I gave Eli my okay to tell you, that was a choice I made, not the bond. I had spent a year not calling you, and the bond had not overridden that, because I had not let it. He looked at me. Does that make sense? It makes sense, I said carefully. You're saying the bond is there, but it doesn't have to be in control. I'm saying I think I can choose what I do with it, which is what I was afraid I couldn't do. He looked back at Luz, at her small, intent face working at the bottle. I spent a lot of time being afraid of my own biology, feeling like it was something that could happen to me. But it's mine. It belongs to me, and I get to decide what it means. Something about the simplicity of that hit me in a way I hadn't expected, because there was so much that could be said about it. The theoretical framework, the history, the complexity of it, and he had found the core of it and held it up in 3 sentences. Yeah, I said. It belongs to you. He nodded, looked at me again. Same for you, same for me. Your alpha thing, it's yours. It's not something that gets to decide what happens between us. He held my gaze. I know that now. I think I always knew it about you, in particular. I was afraid of the idea of alphas, not of you. I know, I said. And I'm sorry that the idea of alphas is what it is, that you had to fight against that. Not your fault. No, but it affected you. It affected us. I'm allowed to be sorry about things that aren't my fault. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, You got better at talking about this stuff over the year. I had a lot of time to practice, in my head. With imaginary me? Extensively. The corner of his mouth curved. How did imaginary me respond? Perfectly. You were very understanding. Now you have to deal with real me. Real you is better. I said and meant it so completely that he heard it, and the curve became a full smile, and Luz made a small sound of satisfaction, and I was in that moment. More myself than I had been in a year. He moved back at the end of spring. It was not a dramatic decision, or not an entirely dramatic one. It had been building for months through the slow accumulation of small choices, each one a degree closer than the last. He had been spending more time at my apartment. His apartment had started to feel less like sanctuary and more like halfway, a transition space that had served its purpose. He had started leaving things at mine. Luz's spare outfit in the closet, a plant on my windowsill, the specific brand of coffee he could not drink any other version of. One weekend he said, "I've been thinking about what makes sense logistically." Logistically, I repeated. Don't make a thing of it. I'm not making a thing of it, I'm just noting the word choice. The word choice is deliberate. He was folding laundry on my couch while Luz supervised from her playmat and I sat on the floor nearby. Practically speaking, doing the drive every weekend is not sustainable long term. And she should. Luz should have both of us accessible, not just on weekends. I was trying very hard not to say anything that would make him feel managed toward a conclusion he was in the process of reaching on his own. I'm not saying I'm ready to jump back into, he gestured, everything. I know. But I think, possibly, in the near future, it might make sense to revisit the living situation. That sounds very reasonable, I said, keeping my voice entirely even. He threw a sock at me. We took it slowly. He moved back in stages. First some boxes, then Luz's things, then himself. Arriving one Saturday with a carful of what remained, and the particular expression of someone who has made a difficult decision and is committed to it, but also aware that commitment does not require the absence of fear. We set up Luz's room first. It had been my office. I had worked at the kitchen table for months, and the transition was not difficult. We painted it a specific shade of yellow that he had found in a sample book and held up in approximately 47 different kinds of light before deciding on a yellow that was warm without being aggressive. That made the room feel like afternoon. That first night back, with Luz asleep in her yellow room and the two of us sitting in the kitchen, he said, "I need to tell you something." "Okay." When I left, the night I left, he was looking at his hands on the table. I almost didn't. I stood at the door for almost an hour, with my bag. I kept thinking I would put it down and come back to bed. I did not say anything. I waited. And part of what made me go, part of what finally made me walk out, was that I was afraid that if I came back to bed, I would never leave. That you sleeping there would be enough reason to stay, and that I would use your existence as a reason not to do the hard thing. He looked up. That's not a criticism of you. I need to be clear about that. I understand, I said slowly. I loved you so much that I was afraid it would make me a coward. Does that make any sense? It made a painful, precise kind of sense. I thought about it for a long moment, about the particular trap of that, how love can become a justification for not doing the work you need to do. How the warmth of it can be used to insulate yourself from the discomfort of growth. I think, I said carefully, that it makes sense, and I also think you were wrong. I think you could have done the hard thing and also stayed, but I understand why you didn't believe that at the time. I'm starting to believe it now, he said. Good. Is it enough? He asked. For you. Is what I can give you right now, is it enough? Because I know it's not what it was before. We're still finding our way back to each other, and I know that's not. Marco, I said. He stopped. It's enough, I said. It's more than enough, it's everything. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and put his hand over mine. Not dramatically, just placed it there, warm and present, and let it rest. We stayed like that while the apartment settled into the new shape of being occupied by 3 people again, the specific quiet of a home that is full. A few weeks after he moved back, I came home from work to find him on the kitchen floor. Not in distress, he was sitting cross-legged with Luz on his lap, and they were apparently engaged in a serious conversation. Or at least, he was narrating something to her with great conviction, and she was responding with the range of sounds available to a baby who has recently discovered her voice. They were both too absorbed in each other to notice me immediately. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching. He was talking to her about plants, explaining, apparently, why the one in the living room was looking less than its best, and what the contributing factors were, and what he planned to do about it. She was listening with the focused attention she brought to everything, those dark eyes tracking his face, her small hands waving with the particular enthusiasm she deployed when something interested her. I had spent so much of the past year on this kitchen floor in its various capacities, grieving, waiting, hoping, being devastated, being relieved, coming home to a life that had been emptied and then slowly, carefully, returned to me in a form that was different from what it had been and perhaps truer. And here was the floor now. Here was the kitchen. Here was Marco telling our daughter about plant nutrition. And here was Luz considering it with the full gravity of her current intellectual capacity. And here, in the doorway, was me. Marco looked up, saw me, smiled. The real one, the chest shake one, compressed into something smaller and quieter but no less genuine. "You're home," he said. "I'm home," I said. Luz turned her head toward me with the expression she always made when she heard my voice. A particular lighting up, a recognition that still undid me every single time. The knowledge that this person who had not existed a year ago already knew me, had already filed me away in the category of safe and familiar and home. I crossed the kitchen and sat down on the floor beside them. Marco shifted to make room, and I settled in, and Luz looked between us with the philosophical expression of someone taking inventory of her world and finding it satisfactory. "She's had a theory about the plant," Marco said. "What's the theory? She thinks it needs more light. She expressed this quite clearly. Smart kid. Takes after her father." I looked at him. He was already looking at me, with that expression I was learning to read. The complex one. The one that held more than one thing at a time. That was still becoming, still working out its full vocabulary. "Which one?" I asked. He considered this with mock seriousness. "Both," he decided. "She takes after both of her fathers." The word landed softly between us, not declared, not announced, just placed there, a word that had been waiting for the right moment to take its shape and had found it here on the kitchen floor, with the afternoon light coming through the window and Luz supervising the conversation with the authority of someone who had already decided how this was going to go. She is 4 months old the first time she laughs. We are both there. That is the thing I will remember. Not just that it happened, but that we were both there in the same room at the same moment. And we looked at each other across her when the sound came out, and both of us understood simultaneously what it was and what it meant. Marco has been telling her something, one of his elaborate narrations. This one about the history of the plant that now lives in a sunnier spot in the living room and is doing considerably better. And he has gotten to a part of the story that apparently struck her as genuinely funny. And she laughed, a real laugh, small and surprised and wholly delighted, and it was the most extraordinary sound I had ever heard in my life. We both froze. Then, we both looked at each other. He was already crying. I was not far behind. "Do it again," I managed. "Say whatever you said again." "I don't remember exactly, Marco. I was talking about root structure." "Then talk about root structure." He looked at me, laughed himself. Not the same laugh as Luz's, deeper and more complicated and colored by everything the last year had been, everything we had lost and found and rebuilt. Then he looked back at Luz and started talking about root structure again in the animated, committed tone of a man who takes his daughter's interests seriously. She did it again. Laughed at root structure. Laughed at her father's voice, at the warmth of it, at the specific frequency of it that she had been hearing since before she was born. I reached over and took Marco's hand. He let me. He turned his hand over and held mine back, the way he used to. The easy, habitual holding of two people who have decided that this is where their hands belong. Luz laughed again, unprompted this time, apparently at the ceiling or at the quality of the afternoon, or at something in the universe that only she was in on. Outside, it was raining. The soft, persistent rain of a spring that is becoming summer, washing the streets and filling the gutters and pulling up from the soil everything that had been waiting through the cold for permission to grow. Inside, on the floor of our living room, the three of us were laughing, together. At last. The plant, I noticed, was looking very well. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe. Comment down your favorite part of the story, and if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, make sure to join our Patreon. Link is in the description. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.